Appreciate it. Thanks. All right. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. Appreciate it. Can I scoot this forward slightly? Cool. All right. I'm going to flip through some stuff, but we're going to make this interactive. So if there's questions and stuff that come up along the way, would love for people to shout them out. I know we'll have sort of some time for it at the end, but feel free to pepper me with anything that comes up. I like to always start with an idea of what the goal is. When I'm coming in speaking to any group, conference, or anything, I really want to set the intention. What am I trying to do when I speak? What am I trying to do with the book or any of the things that I put out into the world? And it's pretty simple. It's this. I want to make you think deeply about what you want your life to look like. It sort of sounds like a simple goal, but it's actually really important. One of the things I have learned in spending time with some of the highest performing people around the world is that very few people have actually taken the time to answer this question. You sort of know, like, oh, I have some number in mind of the amount of money I want to make, or I have, some loose vision, or I'm grabbing at things that other people have handed me. But you've never really thought deeply about what you actually want your life to look like. Not what the world has told you it should look like, not what your family tells you, not what your friends tell you, certainly not what social media has told you, but what you actually want it to look like. So that's really what the focus is going to be of this discussion today. And the start of it is going to be around what I talk about as the broken scoreboard. I am not going to talk too much about myself, but I do think it makes sense to start here because the things that I share, the topics that I talk about, are very much a manifestation of my own journey. And this is really a story of then and now. You see these kind of two sides. This photo on the left is a picture of me a few years ago, maybe about 50 pounds ago, hiding a whole lot of things from the world, if I'm being completely honest. I was born of a pretty unlikely collision of two worlds. My mom was born and raised in Bangalore, India. She was the third daughter, kind of a rebellious spirit, but had her whole life mapped out for her. She was going to have an arranged marriage. She was going to settle down for this pretty normal life. My dad was born and raised in the Bronx, New York, here, completely other side of the world, to a very domineering father figure who similarly had his son's whole life mapped out for him. My dad was going to marry a Jewish girl, settle down for this life in academia. And by a pretty unlikely turn of fate, my parents happened to cross paths over a 2-week period in Princeton, New Jersey library. My mom had applied in secret to come to college here in the States. My dad was studying feverishly for his final PhD defense. And my mom walks up to my dad and asks him out on a date. She was the rebellious spirit, after all. And on this first date, my dad says to my mom, "My father will never accept us." And my mom was so blinded by his use of the word us that she completely missed the message. And unfortunately, my dad was right. His father was not accepting of this courtship, this idea of his son sort of spurning his wishes for the first time, and forced him to choose between my mom and his family. And my dad made an impossible choice at the time and walked out, chose my mom, chose love. And to this day, I never met my dad's parents. He has 3 siblings I never met. I have first cousins out there in the world that I've never met. All on this one decision to choose to reject the default path, to choose to live by his own design. And that decision, the ripple effect of that, I think of as sort of setting this entire legacy that has kind of rippled throughout my family. It took my dad 28 years to make that decision, to reject the default path that was handed to him. And when I joke with him about it now, I basically say that he beat me by 2 years. Because for the first 30 years of my life, I very much followed the traditional path towards what we would all think of as a successful life. I sort of did the things that you were supposed to want to do. I was a pretty insecure kid. I grew up with a high achieving academically older sister. And from a young age, I started telling myself this story that I wasn't very smart. My mom is Indian, my dad's a Harvard professor. So you can imagine, like, from both sides, I was getting this academic pressure. Academic success was how my family measured success. And I started telling myself that I wasn't capable of that thing. I see some younger people in the crowd and some kids. Those stories that you tell yourself about who you are and what you're capable of determine your entire reality. So if you're a kid or if you're young or anyone here and you tell yourself a story that you are not smart or that you are not capable, I guarantee you will find evidence that confirms that belief. And you'll ignore every piece of evidence you could find that would refute it, that would break it down. Because these stories really do govern our reality. It's called the narrative fallacy. And if you're a kid and you develop that kind of insecurity, that type of internal void, the first thing you do is you try to find external solutions to this internal problem. And in our modern society, the easiest way to get these external solutions, these pats on the back, these affirmations, is by making money. It's by achieving success in the traditional sense of the word. So I went and did that. I went and took the job. That was the job I thought would make me sound successful. The good LinkedIn posts, not necessarily the job that I actually wanted. And for those early years of my career, I marched down this steady path towards a successful life while losing sight of the fact that everything else in my life was starting to fall apart. I continued to convince myself that my happiness, my contentment, my fulfillment was on the other side of some goal, some achievement, some bonus, some promotion, whatever that thing was. It's called the arrival fallacy. It's a pretty common phenomenon. Actually, a few weeks ago, the #1 golfer in the world, Scottie Scheffler, gave this press conference that went pretty viral where he talks about the fact that winning golf tournaments was no longer fulfilling to him in any way. That he would feel this like momentary blip of dopamine-induced euphoria and then sort of reset. Like, what's next? The never enough feeling. I'm willing to bet that everyone has felt that at some point in your life. You've built something up as being the point where you are going to have arrived. You're going to feel fundamentally different about who you are. Everything's going to fall into place. And then you get it, you feel that momentary blip, and then you sort of reset to that feeling of what's next. I did that over and over and over again. And all along the way, the other areas of my life were showing cracks. Most importantly, my relationships. I was living 3,000 miles away from my parents, closest people in the world to me. I had noticed for the first time that they were slowing down, that they weren't going to be around forever. My sister and my relationship had ground to a halt. I was drinking 6-7 nights a week. My mental and physical health were in disarray. I was significantly heavier than I was now, really unhealthy. And most importantly, my wife and I were in the middle of this 2-year struggle with infertility, which was creating a real strain in our life for the first time, and a really difficult thing. And it came to this point at the end of 2020 where I had this realization that from the outside looking in, you would have said I was winning the game. It was like, I'm doing the things you're supposed to want to do. I'm achieving the things I'm supposed to want to achieve. But I realized that if that was what winning felt like, I had to be playing the wrong game. And it all came to a head for me with a single conversation in May of 2021, right about at the outset of the book. I went out for a drink with this old friend, and we sat down, and he asked how I was doing. And I said that it had started to get difficult living so far away from my parents, 3,000 miles away. And he asked how old they were. And I said mid-60s. And he asked how often I saw them. And I said about once a year at this point. And he just looked at me and said, okay, so you're going to see your parents 15 more times before they die. Gut punch. I actually had to take a deep breath and avoid this instinctively angry response and realize that it wasn't him trying to be mean or rude. It was actually a very dear friend. It was just math. The math, however much I didn't like it, said that I was going to see my parents 15 more times before they were gone. If life expectancy is around 80, they're in their mid-60s, and I see them once a year, that was what the math said. And that moment changed everything for me, because in that moment, I realized that my entire definition of success, of what it meant to build and live a wealthy life, had been incomplete. I was focusing on this one thing at the expense of everything else. And that if I didn't make a change, we were going to end up somewhere where we didn't want to be. And so the next day, my wife and I sat down and had a very candid conversation about what our center truly was, what we wanted to build our life around, what our true north really was. And that led to a pretty dramatic action. Within 45 days, I left my job, this high status, high paying job in California. We had sold our house and moved 3,000 miles across the country to live closer to both of our sets of parents here in the New York area. And in that one decision was a very important realization, which is that you are in much more control of your time than you think. We had taken an action and fundamentally created time. That number, 15 more times before they're gone, it's now in the hundreds. I see my parents multiple times a month. They're a huge part of my son, their grandson's life. We had taken an action and reassumed agency over our own lives. We realized that we were actually capable of taking action to build our life around the things that we truly cared about. And that was the spark that started this entire journey to write this book, to share these ideas, because what it led me to start figuring out and wanting to understand is, why had I fallen victim to this trap in the first place? What was the issue? Why had I been marching down this path towards winning in this one domain, but losing in this much bigger picture view of our life? And what I realized is, it was really simple. What you measure in life really matters. The things that you measure end up dictating all of your actions. You're all interested in health and wellness. Best example I can think of around this is if you put on like a sleep tracking ring or band, all of a sudden you become the most annoying sleep person in the world. Like, oh, I can't go out, my sleep score, I can't have a drink with you, it impacts my sleep score. All of a sudden, the one thing that you can measure, all of your actions go and surround that one thing. And historically, as a society, what is the one way that we measure our entire life worth? The way that we stack ourselves up, the way that we think controls who we are as people and our success. It is money. And unfortunately, while money is a part of living a good life, it is far from the only part. And so what you see happening to a lot of people is what was happening to me, which is marching towards what I talk about as the Pyrrhic victory. This term comes from history. It's King Pyrrhus of Epirus charges into battle with the Roman Republic in ancient times, and he fights this bloody multi-day battle on this open plain. He's victorious in the battle. He wins. He beats the Romans back, but loses all of his lead generals and a whole bunch of his soldiers during the process. And he is said to have exclaimed at the end of this victory, "Another such victory, and we will be undone." The idea of a Pyrrhic victory is the term for the battle won but the war lost. The idea that you can actually win a victory that comes at such a steep cost that it might as well have been a defeat. This is not just a history lesson. This is what we actually need to avoid in our lives. This is the idea of the person who has made hundreds of millions, maybe $1 billion, that we pat on the back and celebrate and admire, and ignore the fact that they have 4 divorces and 5 kids that don't talk to them. We all know people like this, that we celebrate, that we admire. We might read books about these people. We tell these people that they won the game. And my entire life changed when I realized that that was not a game that I cared to win. That my definition of success was fundamentally different. That I would never want to trade lives with the people that I was reading books about. And so that sent me on this journey to try to understand, what are the pillars of this more comprehensively fulfilling life? If I know it's not just money, if that's a part of it but not the only thing, what are the pillars? And I went and talked to thousands of people over the course of the 3 years researching for this book. Young and old, all walks of life. I asked young people what they hoped their life would look like at 50, at 80. Old people, what advice they would give to their younger selves, what regrets they had, all sorts of questions. And 4 themes kept coming up. Time, people, purpose, and health. Over and over and over again. Time, people, purpose, and health. Money was sort of an enabler to those, but it was not an end in and of itself. So those 4 ideas ended up creating this concept of a new scoreboard, a new way to measure your life. Because when you measure the right things, you take the right actions so that you can create the right outcomes, go and build this life. You can actually win the battle and the much bigger picture war of this life. That is the 5 types of wealth. That is what the book is all about. Time wealth, social wealth, mental wealth, physical wealth, and financial wealth. I'll briefly talk through all of these and then we'll open up for a discussion. This is the new scoreboard. How many of you know who this is? Show of hands. Most? Yeah, most of you. Okay. Warren Buffett. For those who don't know, he's probably the most successful investor of all time. Certainly the most well-known investor of all time. How many of you would trade lives with him? Fewer hands. Good. He's worth $130 billion. Sounds pretty good. He flies around on a Boeing business jet. He's got access to absolutely anyone in the world. He reads and learns for a living. But none of you would trade lives with him for one very simple reason. He's 95 years old. There's no way you would agree to trade the amount of time that you all have left for all of that money. And on the flip side, he would give absolutely anything to be in your shoes. He would give up every single dollar that he has to be sitting where you are today, to have the amount of time that you have left. So with a simple question, what you bring to light is the idea that your time has quite literally incalculable value. And yet, on a daily basis, how much of that time are we really wasting? How much of that time are we spending scrolling on our phones, worrying about the past, comparing ourselves to other people, stress about the future, fundamentally disregarding this one most precious asset that we really have? Because the truth is that you are a time billionaire. A billion seconds is about 30 years. So if you're 20 years old today, you have maybe 2 billion seconds left. If you're 50 years old, about 1 billion seconds left. But we don't treat ourselves that way. We don't think about the fact that time is the real asset that we need to be careful about allocating, that we need to think deliberately about how we allocate. We all know that we have to be careful about how we allocate our money. People spend all of this energy thinking about the perfect allocation of their investments, and where you put it and what you're doing with your money and all of these different things. And we never spend a second worrying about where we're allocating our time, who we are giving our time to, the projects, the opportunities, the people, when in fact, this is the most important thing. The ancient Greeks actually had two different words for time. They had chronos and kairos. Chronos was the idea of chronological, linear time, that all time is created equal. And then kairos was the idea that there are certain moments, certain windows that have more texture, they have more meaning. That energy invested into these specific windows can actually create extraordinary outcomes. I have two pictures of individuals here. Warren Buffett is one of them, and then Lionel Messi, maybe the best soccer player of all time. Both of these two individuals represent this idea of kairos time very well. If you go and search Lionel Messi walking on Google, you'll get about 500,000 hits. He probably has the most talked about walking habit in the world. Commentators constantly complain about the fact that he walks all around the field, and they call it laziness. They think he's like being lazy walking around. But it's not laziness, it's actually the opposite, it's strategy. As he walks around the field, he's conserving energy, he's creating space, he's creating a mental map, and then at the right moment, at the perfect angle, he deploys 100% energy to get the ball and score. That is kairos time in a nutshell. It is the recognition that there are certain moments and opportunities that have the opportunity to create these extraordinary outcomes. Warren Buffett is the same with his investment philosophy. He's famous for saying that you don't have to swing at every pitch, you get to wait for a juicy one. Exact same idea. We all need to live a little bit more like that. Identify what are those 2 to 3 opportunities, the 2 to 3 people, opportunities, projects, whatever they are, that truly carry that weight, that represent those things that are actually going to move our life in the direction that we really care about. Because otherwise what happens is we spin our wheels on the 100 things in front of us. And we all end up in that constant busyness treadmill of taking on everything, but not feeling like we're making any real progress in our lives. One of the most striking visualizations that brings to life this idea of kairos time is this chart, which is a chart that is from the American Time Use Survey data, showing the amount of time you spend with different types of people over the course of your life. This one chart shows the amount of time we spend with our children over the course of our lives. And what it brings to life is the idea that there is a very short, devastatingly short window of time during which your children are truly in your life. I'm in the middle of this right now. I have a 3-year-old son at home. The most crazy part about this is this stat. 95% of the time you have with your kids is over by the time they turn 18. 75% is over by the time they turn 12. There's this common phrase that you get 18 summers with your kids, and I actually think it's mostly nonsense. It's actually less than that. For the first few, there's sort of a blob. I just got through that. There's like not a whole lot going on. And then for the last few, if you have teenage children, there's some teenagers in the crowd, you probably don't want to hang out with your parents quite as much. You have best friends, boyfriends, girlfriends, there's other things going on in your life. And so really you get this 10-year window. And that 10-year window tends to coincide with the time when you are told to chase every single more that the world tells you should want. The call to action around this is to ask yourself what you truly want, to not live by default on the path that everyone else has told you should pursue, and to choose, to ask yourself how you can bring your children along for the journey. Include them in the why of why you are pursuing the things you're pursuing, why you're working hard on these things, why you care about these things. To realize that these magic years will be gone before you know it, and to really try to be present during them. There's this idea from a philosopher named Sam Harris that all of these things that we take for granted in life, there will be a last time for all of them. There will be a last time your kids want you to tuck them into bed at night, a last time you get to go on that walk with your sibling, a last time you get that date with your parents, the last time you get your old group of college buddies together for that annual trip. All of these things we take for granted are things that our older self will wish they could go back and do. And so the call to action is to stop using the word later, to recognize that this word later is the most dangerous word in the dictionary. We constantly say, I'm going to do this later. I'm going to spend more time with my kids later. I'll invest in my health, in my relationships later. I'll find my freedom and purpose later. And the sad thing is that later just becomes another word for never, because those things are not going to exist in the same way later. Your kids are not going to be 5 years old later. Your friends, your partner, they won't be there for you later if you don't invest in them now. Your health won't be there for you later if you don't invest in it now. You won't magically wake up with freedom and purpose later. So either we find some way, some tiny way to design these things into our life right now, or we're just going to end up regretting it later. And it doesn't have to be perfect for it to be beneficial. Ambitious people are the worst with this. All of you are ambitious. You wouldn't be here if you weren't. Ambitious people constantly allow optimal to get in the way of beneficial in our lives. We say things like, I don't have an hour to come into the gym today, so I'm just not going to go. I don't have 2 hours to do deep work, so I'm just going to send some emails instead. I don't have an hour to call my mom, so I'm not even going to send the text. When the truth is that anything above zero compounds positively. Anything above zero compounds. Infinitely better to do the tiny thing than to do nothing. The 15-minute walk is infinitely better than doing nothing. Sending the text to your mom is infinitely better than doing nothing. 30 minutes of deep work, infinitely better than doing nothing. So even if you're finding yourself in a season of life where the thing cannot be a priority, you can still design the tiny daily action that keeps the ball moving forward, that prevents the atrophy in these areas. Anything above zero compounds. Social wealth. I'm willing to guess that fewer of you know who this is. It's a woman named Margaret Mead. She's a famous anthropologist, and the reason I show her here is because there's a really interesting story about Margaret Mead getting asked by a student of hers, what is the first sign of civilized human society? And they probably thought she was going to answer something about tools or language or knowledge dissemination, something like that, but she took it a different direction. She said that a healed, broken femur was the first sign of civilized human society. It's kind of a weird response, but what you need to know, and some of you may, is that a broken femur takes a few months to heal. And so what Mead was reasoning was that prior to civilized human society, a broken femur was a death sentence. You were basically being left behind. The whole rest of the group would say, like, too bad, you can no longer contribute any value, leaving you behind, you're going to get eaten by lions or whatever your fate was going to be. But that in civilized human society, you found a healed broken femur, which indicated that the person had been cared for, that others had sacrificed their own well-being to bring someone along and take care of them, even when they had no direct utility in the form of the ability to hunt or gather, that they provided some other utility that maybe you could not see. That is all about relationships. That is about the fact that relationships are what allowed us to survive and thrive as a species. Relationships are what make us uniquely human. And yet, we live in a time where we are in the middle of the worst loneliness epidemic that the world has ever seen. Teenagers in the United States are spending 70% less time in person with their friends than they were 2 decades ago. 70% less time. We live in an era where it is no longer normal to get together and have a party with your friends. There's some interesting articles that just came out about this, that the amount of partying in the United States is down 70 to 90% over the last 2 decades. The amount of time we're actually spending in person with friends, with other people that we love. It is going to have dire impacts on our health and well-being. We know this scientifically, that relationships are the single greatest predictor of living a happy, healthy life. The Harvard study of adult development followed the lives of 1,300 original participants, 700 of their descendants, over the course of 85 years. They found that the single greatest predictor of physical health at age 80 was relationship satisfaction at age 50. It wasn't blood pressure, it wasn't cholesterol, it wasn't your smoking or drinking habits. It was how you felt about your relationships that determined how well you aged. What more reason do we need to invest in our relationships than to realize that they are the one thing that is going to contribute to the happy, healthy life that we're trying to build? And yet, in our own lives, they are the first thing that fall by the wayside when we get busy. We get busy with work, things are chaotic. The first thing we drop the ball on is getting coffee with that friend, going out for that date, calling our mom, doing these things that fundamentally contribute to building our relationships over long periods of time. So the simple antidote to this is to take daily, tiny actions to invest in your relationships. To recognize that relationships are the single greatest investment that you can make. We know when it comes to money that putting away a little bit today is better than nothing because it's going to stack and compound into our future. Put away $100 today, it's going to continue to grow over a long period of time. Same exact principle applies to relationships. Tiny investments today are going to stack and compound in your future. Doing the tiny things, sending the text, calling the friend, getting together for that coffee date. Don't let that annual trip with your college friends fall apart. It's very easy. I know I'm right in the middle of that now. It's very easy if no one takes the lead on planning those things. And those are the relationships and those are the things that really do provide the texture for this good life that we are all trying to build. Mental wealth. Mental wealth is about this idea of like a hero's journey. It's sort of something anyone that's watched a Pixar film knows what a hero's journey is, whether you know it or not. It's the idea of like the hero that leaves the safety and confines of their home, goes off on this grand ambitious journey, faces all sorts of trials and tribulations, and comes back a changed individual. This is about it being your own hero's journey, not it being grand or ambitious to anyone else, but it being yours. I've said this in the past that the worst thing in the world is not being on a bad path. The worst thing in the world is being on a good path that isn't yours. Bad path screams at you every single day to get off of it. We all know when we're on a bad path. All of the forces around your life are telling you, I have to make a change, I have to go and do something. But the good path that isn't yours is a little more tricky. It's a little more devious. Because there's all sorts of forces around you that tell you that maybe you can just stay on this. It's fine, this is pretty good, you're meeting your responsibilities. There's things about it that want to keep you there. There's forces, there's gravity to it. It takes a lot of courage to step off that path and to go and carve your own. That is about purpose. It's about finding what really lights you up, what aligns your short-term actions with your long-term priorities. It's about growth, recognizing that you are capable of change, that you are a dynamic individual. And it's about this last piece, space. Space is an interesting idea because we don't think about it often. Space is about this separation that exists between stimulus and response in your life. What I mean by that is, in your life, effectively everything is governed by stimulus and response. Stimulus is all the things that come in, and then your response is your reaction to those things. In our normal life, you wake up in the morning, what's the first thing you do? If you're anything like me, you grab your phone off your bedside table or wherever it sits. You have thousands of text messages, emails, social media notifications, all sorts of stimulus immediately coming in. It's like 1,000 people coming into your bedroom, which makes no sense if it was literal. You would never allow 1,000 people to come into your bedroom, but technologically, for whatever reason, we accept it, we say it's fine. And from the start of the day until the time you go to bed at night, you're in this fixed loop of stimulus and response. There's no space that exists between the two. Viktor Frankl has this famous quote that our power is in the space we can create, because then we get to choose our response. We slow things down. That is really similar to that idea that I shared about Lionel Messi, creating that space, slowing things down so that you can see the bigger picture. What that space allows you to do is make decisions that are actually in line with where you're trying to go. You can course correct along the way if you have that space. If everything is urgent and you're taking action as soon as the stimulus comes in, you're never going to be able to make the appropriate decisions in a given situation. So the ideas here that I would share would be two things. Micro space on a daily basis. Give yourself little 5-minute pockets that you have throughout the day. Like if you're in back-to-back meetings between things, schedule meetings for 25 minutes rather than 30 so that you get a 5-minute break before those meetings start. It makes a huge, huge difference. Generally speaking, the first 5 minutes of a meeting end up being stupid banter about the weather, so you can actually get the exact same amount done with 5 minutes left that you can go take a walk, do a couple push-ups, just do something that creates little pockets of space. Or if you can't do that, give yourself 5 minutes before you go to bed at night to just jot down a few things. Get a few things off your brain and onto a piece of paper. Your life starts to improve. Macro space on a monthly or quarterly basis. Take yourself out on a date for an hour, 30 minutes or an hour if you can carve it out. Go to a coffee shop, bring a piece of paper, bring a pad, no technology, and just zoom out and think about some of the bigger picture questions in your own life. One of the questions I love asking is, if a third party were to observe me for a week, how serious would they say I am about my goals? If they were to come and watch me, see all the things I'm doing, look at my calendar, see how I'm pursuing different things in my life, how serious would they say I am about the things that I consider my goals? Hold yourself to the fire a little bit and watch your life improve around it. Physical wealth, I think everyone will understand here. The question that I love to ask and the visualization that I love is, will you be dancing at your 80th birthday party? I think for everyone in this room, the answer is yes, which is a great thing. The answer to that question is fundamentally dictated by the actions that you're taking today and in the days, weeks, and months that follow. I realized this at my 10-year college reunion. In 2023, I went back, got together and saw everyone. And the realization that I had at this 10-year reunion was that some people looked 32 and some people looked 52. And it's because you can't hide your daily habits over a long time horizon. Your daily habits quite literally show up on your face if you give them enough time. We all get to take daily actions and control whether or not we're going to be dancing at our 80th birthday party. And finally, financial wealth. This is the one we all know and understand to some extent, but I'm going to add a different sort of lens to it for all of you to close this out, which is this idea of enough. What does it mean to you to have enough? There's a story about these two famous American authors, Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller. They're walking around the palatial garden estate of this billionaire in the Hamptons, and Vonnegut turns to Heller and says, "Joe, how does it feel that just yesterday, the owner of this home made more money than your most famous book, Catch-22, made in its entire lifetime?" And Heller says, "Yes, but I've got something that he'll never have." Vonnegut says, "Oh yeah, what's that?" And Heller replies, "The knowledge that I've got enough." What does that really mean, that knowledge that I've got enough? And why did he have the audacity to say that that knowledge was worth more than the billions of dollars that this individual had? Well, the truth is that your expectations are your single greatest financial liability. If your expectations rise faster than your assets, you will never feel wealthy. You'll just be chasing whatever more the world has told you should want. The story that I share in the book as well that brings this to life is one of an investment banker and a fisherman. Some of you may have heard this. Investment banker goes down to this Mexican fishing village and he's walking along the docks. He comes across this old boat with a few fish in it. And he asks the fisherman, "How long did it take you to catch these fish?" The fisherman says, "Only a little while." The banker says, "Why didn't you fish for longer?" And the fisherman says, "Well, I have everything I need. In the morning, I fish for a little while, then I go home, I have lunch with my wife and kids, then I take a nap, Then in the evening, I go into town, drink wine, play music, and laugh with my friends. The banker says, you got this all wrong. Here's what you got to do. You got to fish for longer so you can catch more fish. Then you use that money to buy a second boat. Then that boat goes out and fishes. Use that money to buy a third boat, a fourth boat, a fifth boat, a sixth boat. Pretty soon you have a whole fishing enterprise. You move to the big city, you take your fishing enterprise public, and you're going to make millions. The fisherman says, and then what? The banker says, and then what? Then you can retire and move to a small fishing town. You can fish for a little while in the morning, then you can go home, have lunch with your wife and kids, then you can take a nap, then you can go into town, drink wine, play music, and laugh with your friends. It's a funny story. The common interpretation of that story is to say that the banker is wrong and the fisherman is right. But I think it's more nuanced than that. It is about the fact that the two have a fundamentally different definition of what it means to have enough. It is perfectly okay and reasonable for the banker's definition of enough to be about building something big, chasing this grand ambition, creating jobs, going after this big goal. But for him to apply that map of reality to the fisherman's terrain makes no sense. The fisherman's already living his definition of enough. And yet, that is what we do when we take out our phones and we compare our lives to other people. We allow other people's maps of reality to impact how we feel about our own terrain. The antidote to that is to get very clear on what your enough life looks like. What the money is actually for. The things that you are chasing in your life. What is the life you are actually trying to build? And the most important point is that it cannot be a number. First thing that happens, I go and ask 1,000 people, what does enough mean to you? You're going to give me some number. You're just going to make up a number out of here. Oh, 3 million, 5 million, 10 million, 100, but whatever the number, you're going to say a number. And what we know about numbers scientifically is that they do this little disappearing act. This little like mirage thing happens where you get close to it and then it just goes to a bigger number. Michael Norton is this Harvard Business School professor. He studied this. He went and asked a bunch of rich people, high net worth individuals, worth $1 million through $100 million plus. How happy are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Then he asked, how much more money would you need to be at a 10 happiness? Across the board, whether they were worth $1 million or $100 million plus, they all said they needed 2 to 3 times as much money to be at a 10. It makes no sense. There should just be a happiness number at some point, but that's not how humans work. These numbers do this mirage. They disappear and reappear on the horizon. The way that you get around that is by having it be an actual vision of the life you are trying to build. Usually when people throw a number out, they have no idea what that life actually looks like. I could have told you a few years ago, oh yeah, 10 million and then everything's good. I have no idea what life that actually looks like. Where do I want to live? What do I want to do? Who do I want to be around? Who do I want to be spending time with? What do I want to be thinking about when I wake up in the morning? The actual life you are trying to build, what is the money actually for? Because when you get clear on that, you're no longer chasing money. You're chasing a life. And when you have a life in mind, you can take the actions to go and build it. It becomes a path that you can actually understand, and there's something more meaningful in the building process to go and get it. So I'm going to end with one question that I want all of you to think about in the days and weeks to come. If you were the main character in a movie of your life, what would the audience be screaming at you to do right now? We've all been there, watching a movie or television show. We just want to jump through the screen and grab the main character, shake them. Say, don't go down in that basement, look out behind you, chase the girl to the airport, whatever that thing is. You are that main character in the movie of your own life, and the audience would be screaming something at you right now. So what is it? What is that thing that is so blindingly obvious from the outside looking in that you are either choosing to ignore or have yet to create enough perspective to see? Think about that question in the days and weeks to come, and then take one tiny action against your response to it. That one tiny action could be the thing that fundamentally changes the trajectory of your whole life. Thank you so much for the time and attention. Look forward to taking some questions, having a chat.